The Cold War showdown of the 1950s gave science fiction a question it has always tried to answer. How would humanity survive the man-made apocalypse brought on by its arsenal of nuclear weapons? Since my early childhood, I have had the peculiar urge to be hopeful of an impending nuclear apocalypse. Being exposed to many of the science fiction films from the 70s and 80s, I have longed to live the dream, or rather nightmare, of the radiated deserts and abandoned cities. Alone in the world, wandering the wastes, foraging for radiated food, hoping to find some refuge to make my own. It was a concept ripe with adventure and terror. The post-nuclear world contained characteristics like vast deserts, dilapidated towns, roaming gangs of thugs, radiated ghouls, dog companions, underground bomb shelters, and sawed-off shotguns. It was only time before we were able to live out the fantasy in a simulation. It all started in 1988 with Wasteland, published by Electronic Arts. It featured EGA graphics and was released on the Commodore 64, Apple II, and DOS. The game was set in the post-apocalyptic southwestern US and let the player control a party of rangers exploring the wastes. It was a pretty advanced RPG for its time, giving the player a non-linear experience not found in many RPGs during the late 80s. The game was very open, letting the player overcome obstacles in a variety of ways depending on their party stats. It was also one of the first RPG games to introduce a persistent world. The game came on two 5¼ floppies, and the manual advised the player to back up these discs, since the game would save information directly back onto them. In 1988, hard drives were pretty rare for gaming, and for such a complex game, it needed to save information somewhere so you could continue your quests later. This meant if something wrong happened during the save process, the disk would be corrupted. You also had a manual which included paragraphs the user would be told to read throughout the game, saving space on disks and acting as kind of an old-school DRM. Some of the paragraphs contained a false storyline about going to Mars as a way of confusing those who chose to read it without playing the game. They also included contrasting paragraphs to trick curious readers skipping ahead. The game still is fun to this day, and I recommend anyone who is a fan of old-school RPGs to try it out. It is forgiving at first, since many of your party's characters go unconscious when they run out of health, but later in the game enemies get exceedingly more difficult. When your party does all die, you are treated to an end screen, and yep, booted back to the DOS prompt. On reload though, you start where you left off, a great feature that is lacking in some games even today. There isn't much sound effects or music, so it is best played with your own choice of post-apocalyptic score. Wasteland garnered spots on many top 10 lists. Publishers Electronic Arts and newly formed Interplay, which was founded by ex-EA employees, were both interested in making successors to Wasteland. Electronic Arts started fresh with a new development team and engine for a follow-up entitled Fountain of Dreams, and Interplay began development with the Wasteland engine on a game called Meantime. Fountain of Dreams did poorly, and Meantime was cancelled because the 8-bit EGA graphics market was being crushed by games like Ultima 7 featuring 256 color VGA graphics. It wasn't until 9 years later that Interplay finally saw their spiritual successor to Wasteland. The game was called Fallout and was developed by newcomer Black Isle Studios. It featured many of the same concepts as Wasteland, but because Electronic Arts still owned the rights to Wasteland, so much of the story had to be changed. The game was still set in the post-apocalyptic wastelands, but it took place in a retro future with a 1950s motif. The player controlled a character sent out from his underground Vault 13 into the Southern Californian wastes to find a water computer chip for the Vault's water recycling system. The game was originally going to incorporate Steve Jackson's GURPS system, pretty much the standard for pen and paper RPGs, and they even incorporated this into the game early on. They went as far as to make promotional materials featuring the GURPS system, but because the game was so violent, the deal fell through and they instead created the special system. What made Fallout unique for its time was the ability for the player to respond to dilemmas in the game. If you did something good, like taking out a local gangster, you would earn good karma points, or if you did something bad like become a slaver, you earned bad karma points. This pretty much made the game extremely replayable, as there was a variety of different outcomes and multiple endings to the game. Your map, quest log, and other options were handled through the handy Vault-Tec Pip-Boy. It made the game's interface feel much more in tune with the game world, and provided all the information you would need. Traveling in the map screen, you would stumble upon all sorts of interesting encounters, like fights already occurring, caravans, dead bodies, and many of the game's in-jokes and science fiction references. It made the game world more dynamic when traveling from town to town. During regular play, your character moved in real time, and once you were ready to start fighting or encountered enemies, the game would switch to a turn-based system. During a fight, the amount of action points your character had determined how far you could move, how many shots you could fire, and any other actions your character made. If you used a targeted attack on an opponent, you could choose to shoot at a specific part of their body, giving you more of a chance for a critical and a chance at disabling that part of their body. Fallout's graphics were more than adequate, giving a great feel for the post-apocalyptic retro theme it touted. Beyond the stats, items, weapons, and cosmetics was a darkly humored story. Dialogue was at its best in the first two Fallout games, with great delivery by actors doing the voiceover work. Included in the cast was Ron Perlman, who narrates and provides the most notable quote from the series.
War never changes.
The cast throughout the series also included Richard Dean Anderson, Tony Shalhoub, Richard Mole, David Warner, Jim Cummings, Charles Adler, Michael Dorn, Jeffrey Jones, Malcolm McDowell, Liam Neeson, and many other talented voice actors. After Fallout was released to much praise, picking up the Best RPG of the Year from GameSpot, Black Isle Studios was already underway in a sequel that followed very closely to its predecessor. Fallout 2 took place mostly in Northern California and Nevada, and graphically was very similar to Fallout. You played the descendant of the Vault Dweller, your character from the first game, sent out as the chosen one of your tribe to retrieve a device called the Garden of Eden Creation Kit, also known as the GECK. The sequel was released only a year later in 1998, letting Black Isle Studios focus on content and update many of the game engine's bugs. It gave fans of the first game a chance to relive the post-nuclear world with a bigger, more diverse environment. It added larger towns, a reputation system, new weapons, enemies, and armor, and a car. Reputation added to the karma system, and this showed how your character was perceived by the residents of individual towns. This was important as Fallout 2 incorporated quests that would extend beyond many of them. Fallout 1 and 2 also dealt with some risque elements like prostitution and child killing. At the time, there weren't many mainstream games where you could become a porn star, or a fluffer for one, and contract a venereal disease. In the game, there was also the ability to target and eliminate children that you encountered, earning your character the child killer trait. The little buggers would usually die as a result of crossfire, making you carefully target your opponents in areas where residents inhabited. If you did receive the child killer trait for killing 2 or more kids, a group of bounty hunters would come after you. European release of both games was without the graphics and animations of children, leaving disembodied voices where the children once were. Fallout 2 gained moderate success, and Black Isle Studios looked to update the engine for Fallout 3. During development for Van Buren, Fallout 3's codename, 2 spin-offs of the Fallout series were released. Micro Forte developed Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel, a game that put you in control of a Brotherhood of Steel initiate sent out on missions into the wastes. It added a few new ideas, one of which was real-time combat, something I wasn't a big fan of using since I still had an option for turn-based combat, but because there were so many enemies in each level, it would take forever to complete in turn-based mode. It was easier switching to real-time and rushing in with all your squad's guns blazing. The next game was Interplay's own Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, the first console-based exclusive Fallout game for Xbox and PlayStation 2. It was more action-oriented, giving the player a top-down view of their character, catering to the simple nature of quickly made console games. I didn't get to play this, and I probably never will. Guess we'll just have to leave it at that. Next time when I return, we will look at Black Isle Studios' Fallout 3 Van Buren tech demo, Bethesda's Fallout 3, its downloadable content, and the future of the Fallout series on MediaConsumesMe's History and Review.